Today I'm going to talk about creativity and how creativity and psychic abilities are very much linked in this idea we have called clairvoyance, the ability to see. Now, those who know my work and have read my books will know that I have come from a creative background. Initially I was very interested in painting. I produced a number of exhibitions and did a whole series of different paintings. And it was, for me, for a long time, it was my life. You know, it was everything that drove me in life. I didn't think about being a medium. But the creative gift for me was the stepping off stone in many respects to discovering my spiritual gifts. Because I believe that the creative power within a person is very much linked to this idea of clairvoyance. Now, if you think about it, if you're a creative person and you're also interested in psychic things, I mean, you will probably notice that you have much more ability to visualize and see things than other people. Sometimes ideas will just pop into your head from out of nowhere. You know, it's like you don't have to think about it if you're a creative person. You just get ideas. They just seem to come ready formed, almost out of nowhere, out of the blue. And I found that with my clairvoyance, and in particular what I'd call clairvoyance in the idea that seeing, you know, clairvoyance means clear seeing. I kind of see things. I get pictures. And when those pictures come to me, they're like from outside, just like what happens in a creative piece of work. It comes from nowhere. You know, and many artists have expressed this in their time. Both artists like, for example, Mozart and many of the great musicians, Rachmaninoff, I believe, had the same idea, that they used to just hear the music. You know, it used to just come from nowhere, and it would be there, and all they had to do was write it down. So this, on the one hand, shows the incredible ability of the unconscious and subconscious mind, perhaps, to generate stuff. But I believe it's much more than that, because I found that the deeper I dug, the more that I found that some of that imagery coming to me had come so much from the outside that it actually came from other people. In fact, some of it, for me, came from the spirit world. Now, as an artist, you might find that, for example, you have the ability to see pictures in shapes. We all used to do it very much when we were children. Like if we look at the sky, for example, and we look at the clouds, if we look in the right frame of mind with a sort of attentiveness, but also a concentration, but also a fluid concentration, you start to see all sorts of pictures and images and fantastic things. I mean, I was talking recently on a video I did with my wife Jane on the PATRON channel on this site, and where we were talking about looking at the textures in things like marble. And you see all sorts of beautiful things. In some of the marble in our bathroom, I can see beautiful images of lions and scenes, and I'll come back again and see it all again, and sometimes it looks deeper and then it will change to something else. That is our active imagination bouncing off these things to see images and pictures. So these techniques, I believe, are very helpful for helping you to develop not only your creativity, but also your intuitive and psychic abilities. People like Ernst, for example, who I really like as a painter, would look at things and see images appearing out of random paint on a picture, and then develop those into some of his surrealist paintings. And many other artists said the same thing. Many artists have believed that their pictures seem to come from this part of the mind that is so fluid. Again, it's a bit like Mozart. He would just write down the music, he'd just hear it. And sometimes painters, and I used to find this when I painted, would just look at something random, maybe put some random paint on a canvas or something, and look at it, and suddenly the picture all starts to appear, and you start filling it in, and next thing you've got an amazing picture. It's come from nowhere. It seems you don't use a structured form of intelligence, do you, with this whole idea of being creative. And for me, as I said, it very much linked in with the idea of psychic abilities. I mean, Carl Jung also spoke about active imagination. and he would foster his imagination, he used to say, and would use this idea of concentrated images, you know, concentration and allowing images to flow. And he used these ideas of visual projection very often. You've probably heard about it in things like the Rorschach ink blots, you know, the guy that made all the ink blots. I actually made a set of cards. I was just looking for them. I made a set of cards up using the idea of Rorschach ink blots, right? See, like you remember the sort of thing where they're sort of ink blots, like the butterfly effects that you get. I did produce this. It's a job to get on the internet anymore, but it's a book. It was a section called the Intuition Pack. But no, I made these up and I tested these on my students. I would say, look, what can you see in there? And they'd see a picture of some sort. I said, okay, now go a bit beyond that. What else can you see? What does it tell you about someone sat in front of you? And they start interpreting the images, and then interpreting the images not for themselves as access to their unconscious mind, but also for the people around them. So this became a very, very powerful stepping off tool for people to quickly access their intuition. I'll do a few workshops on that later on this channel, on some of the other programs I do. But this is also substantiated up to a point by science, because there was a German psychologist called Hans Einstein. He worked a lot with the idea of intelligence and personality. I mean, that's what he's most known for. But he also did a lot of interesting experiments into some of the ideas of ESP and what type of personality types make people who are interested in ESP. And he talked about people that were quite often high risk people, like gamblers type, would often be quite more prone to being scoring higher in tests, but certainly more imaginative people, more creative people, and more these would all score better in ESP tests than systematic thinkers. Now, there was another psychologist called Betty Humphrey. She was from Duke University, I believe, and she found that extrovert personalities also displayed better in ESP tests. So the actual and people also who dreamed more and paid more attention to their dreams. So all these type of techniques that we use in psychic things work well with people that are highly imaginative, highly able to think visually, and highly creative. And that's why artists are very much people who are on the way to being psychic. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more in a minute about some of the other scientific ideas about it and what makes some people so completely impossible when it comes to psychic, why they have no chance whatsoever, some people. If you're enjoying these mystic talks, you will enjoy my books, available now in paperback, on Kindle or on Audible. Now, some people have a total, complete inability to have any form of imagination whatsoever. And I don't mean just being poor at imagination, but they have it completely impossible to imagine something. You think what it would be like if you were reading a book and they were describing to you all these incredible scenes, and your mind could not in any way picture those things, has a total inability to picture things. Now, there is a now recently recognised psychological state called aphasia, aphantasia, I think it's pronounced, I'm not quite sure, by a Dr. Adam Zeman, who came up with this idea that some people cannot imagine at all, because he noticed that some people after heart operations or heart attacks and so forth and damage to the brain found that they had no ability to have what we would call the mind's eye. They could not visualize whatsoever, and these were extreme states of people that almost found it impossible to function because they could not visualize. Now, the opposite to that is what you call pareidolia, where people's imaginations is not only projecting, this is what I was talking about with these ideas of the Rorschach ink blots and things, where you look into shapes and see pictures. And some people will see many, many pictures in things, and sometimes see things that aren't there. For example, a good example might be the face on Mars, or the sometimes when you get pictures in food and toast and things like that, and you see very often pictures of Jesus and things people will see in things, and you can see it there, and it's like a picture that's not really there, but it's pareidolia. You know, when you see pictures in trees and bark and the coals of the burning fire, this is called pareidolia. So this is the opposite. This is where the imagination is extremely active and is projecting particularly faces into objects, because our mind will instantaneously try to make something cohesive out of random shapes. It will often see, you know, a child, two dots and another dot for the nose will immediately appear to look like a face for some of us, and particularly for children and infants. So we have this ability both to project and see things all around them, but some have absolutely no hope whatsoever, because their brains are either damaged or they're wired in such a way that they just can't see. You know, if there's damage to the brain, to the occipital lobe, I think it's, yes, the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, which deals with all the seeing. If that is damaged, sometimes people can't visualize at all. But it also takes all other parts of the brain at the same time. So some people, I think, have an inability to imagine. Now, people like the poet William Blake, for example, believe that the imagination was the highest power that human beings could attain to. You know, it was higher than reason. We have this incredible ability to visualize things, and he would consider that people had a higher intelligence. Einstein, for example, had an incredible ability to visualize and imagine things. When he was working out all his mathematics and things, he often simplified it by giving us vivid images of people going up and down in lifts at high speeds, or traveling in two trains travelling next to each other, and then sort of said what we were sat on this object going at the speed of light and so forth. He could turn it into a visual, imaginative and simplified version that could help us to understand very big concepts. So don't knock the imagination, you know, because the imagination is the thing that takes us to the higher levels of consciousness, and takes us very close to what I consider the highest levels of consciousness of all, which are the powers of clairvoyance, which science don't recognise. Now, some time ago, I had a number of bouts on TV with Richard Dawkins, and I'm going to show you a clip or two of this in a moment. But Richard Dawkins, you know, is the what would he be called? I suppose evolutionist, I suppose. He believes very strongly in the idea of evolution. He's a Darwinian. Some people call him Darwin's Rottweiler, you know. And I noticed with that man, although I liked him a great deal as a person, and I've said this before, I thought he was a very interesting man. And actually, we talked off camera about things like science fiction books, and Midwich Cuckoo's book, I remember we were talking about. We both enjoyed that. I actually liked him as a person. I could relate to him. But when it comes to having an argument about these things, people like him are coming from this idea of rationalism. You know, everything that in the world must be explained by rationalism. If we don't follow rationalism, the whole of reality is going to just cave in, and we're back to the times of superstitions and the rest of it, where the world is dysfunctional. Now he has a point on one part. Yeah, we don't want to fall into the ideas where, you know, we don't use rationality and reason and science. But the problem is they become so blinkered in their way of seeing things that they cannot use that other side of the personality, which is the imaginative personality. Because, you know, just like I was describing, somebody with a fantasia can't function. You know, we have to have this balance between reason and imagination. And in fact, I would even put imagination as higher than reason, because it takes us to these abilities to be able to do things that we can't explain where we get the information from. Received knowledge, how a medium, for example, mediums like myself can tell you things about people that we have no possible way of knowing about, or that we get glimpses of the future that there's no way we could possibly know those things, you know, because there's nothing written about it, there's nothing, it's just out of the blue stuff, like I explained before. So all these powers are really important, and I think when a person rejects all this purely for this analytical way of looking at the world, where you try to put everything in a set scientific formula in little boxes, I actually think a person like that psychologically becomes lopsided. They're not seeing the whole picture. They often become very much a person that will reject everything that does not fit in with their way of seeing it. They're almost wired in such a way that they cannot visualize. They cannot see the bigger picture. They cannot imagine beyond the science that they have. You know, and I'm not knocking science, because science is a fantastic system, but all it can do is measure the material world. It cannot get into these states of consciousness that I'm talking about here, about awareness, about human experience, about feelings, imagination and thoughts. Where does all that come from? And those experiences, those ineffable experiences we have of the infinite, and the states beyond normal human consciousness that are beyond description but are there in human experience. So anyway, have a look now at a clip I did a little while back with Richard Dawkins. I think you might find this interesting. And don't forget, if you are following this channel, please become a patron. You can see you can find out more in the description below. I put a link to the Patron site, and patron.com/Hamilton Parker is the URL for the Patron site. But if you become a patron, you can help this channel move forward. You can help us with our spiritual work, and you can also help us with some of our charitable work too. But we can start to produce better and better quality programs on this channel if you can help as a patron, and you'll get all sorts of lots of extras as well. Anyway, have a look at this clip now.
Well, that was a very engaging performance you gave us the other night, but I'm curious, what actually goes on in your head when you're getting these messages that you're relaying to people?
Difficult question to answer. It's not really a rational thinking process. I believe that I'm in touch with my unconscious mind, and that's I believe it's a little bit like, my experience of it is a bit like the way ideas will come into a person's head. Like they'll come into a person's head almost like a fully formed idea, and we don't know where it's come from. And it's a little bit like that. I think you could call it your intuitive mind. I would think of it as.
But do you hear voices? I mean, do you sort of hear a male voice or a female voice, or?
It's a mixture of all the seeing, hearing, feeling, sensing. All of those things come together, but it's more like an blending of thoughts. It's as if my thoughts have been interlaid with another set of thoughts, and it's as if all I really need to do is look within myself. It's a form of introspection that I do, and it's from that I give the information I'm giving, and that seems to correspond with what the person understands about their person that passed over.
Sometimes you feel it's coming from this part of the hall or that part of the hall. So
yes, there's a sensation of where it's coming from.
And you get a kind of glow from that part of the hall?
It's like that comes like a gut feeling. It's sort of like it's almost pulled from the stomach is the feeling I would explain that as. I just feel I know I've got to go to that place, or I know I've got to go to that person. And you can't just think, oh, I think I go over that side of the hall because I've been to that side first. You might find that a whole cluster of people you tend to do all at once, which is, you know, just the way it goes. You're pulled to that direction, and that's how I feel it works.
Now, why do you think you're talking to dead spirits rather than, for example, picking up telepathic messages from the people in the audience, say?
Well, if you can accept telepathy, it could...
Well...
I doubt. But telepathy, it could be telepathy. It could be argued that it could be telepathy. I would argue against that in that in some instances I've had instances where people have come to me afterwards and said that there's something. I, for example, said to one woman, there's a tin of green paint falling in your garage, and she went home and she found a garage was covered in green paint. Now, she didn't know that tin of paint had fallen, therefore I could not have read it from her mind, unless somehow my mind had been able to see remote viewing in another place. We could always argue with one way or the other how ESP works. But I think that when you bring it all together, from my understanding, it is a connection with the spirit world rather than telepathy with the person.
Do you having any trouble in the churchyard and picking up lots of...
Yeah, quite often drop in for a chat, eh? No, places like this, we believe that the spirit world is separate from the earthly world. I mean, you get lots of silly programs that talk about ghost hunting and things like that. Maybe there's vibrations, maybe there's these things called residual energy they talk about. But I believe in the spirit world that we go to after death. All I argue is that the personality continues after death. I don't even know if there's a God. But I can argue that there's what I try to prove through my work, that life continues, that our personality somehow survives.
My wife Jane and I do our public work for free. We raise money through the theatres to raise money for our Hamilton Parker Foundation. This is a not-for-profit company that is soon to be registered as a charity. Now, our work is going in to help with the objectives of this charity, but you can help us as well by becoming what we call a patron of this channel. Now, as a patron, you'll get, first of all sorts of really interesting benefits. You'll have a sort of behind the scenes look at what goes on with our work. You'll get videos before other people. You'll get new videos. You'll get all sorts of benefits that are explained in the patron website, and it has various tiers that you can subscribe to. So you can subscribe to just a little bit and get a few benefits, or you can subscribe a lot and get a lot of benefits. And what this means is that we can raise some money through this channel. Now, this money's not going to me and Jane to give us a fancy lifestyle. This money is going into our foundation that has some fantastic objectives. Now, the first thing we want to do with the foundation is, first of all, get a cyber center together, a cyber temple, as it were, a place where we can introduce new people to you through this channel. So by supporting this channel and giving something to the as a patron, you will find that this channel will start to get better and better content with more and more interesting things going on. We'll be able to get the cameras, we'll be able to have the space, we'll be able to have the right setting where we can build the energy to do things such as mediumistic circles and so forth online. But also our work extends further than that, because we are hoping ultimately to build a spiritual center, a psychic ashram, as it were, where people like you can come to visit and take part in an interactive way through this channel as well. But also we are doing a lot of what we call spiritual service. We are going out and giving a large part of the income we generate to people in India who are destitute. We've given to schools, we've fed children that are in need, we've helped mentally handicapped people, we've given cows to old people in India. Some of all this you'd have seen in my movie Mystic Journey to India on Amazon. But all of this is part of our mission, part of our remit to help the world. Because we're not only trying to find our divine nature, we're also trying to live what we learn and express it in ways that are really beneficial to the world. So if you follow this channel, but more importantly, if you become a patron of this channel, you can help us to take this whole mission onto a much higher level than any psychic work has ever been done before.